This is OUTrageIOUSity 2. There is culture in the world. Cultures of genders, cultures of eras, cultures of devices, cultures of technologies, cultures of organizations, cultures that individual selves are, cultures of basketball teams, cultures of high performance, cultures of investment, cultures of economic development, cultures of risk-taking, cultures of risk avoidance, lots of different cultures in the world. And cultures are shared, heavily practiced routines. And we have different cultures. And we have actual measurements and observations of behaviors of culture 1 and of culture 2. And those are distributions. Not everybody in culture 1 behaves the same way. Not everybody in culture 2 behaves the same way. We have distributions over time. Culture person 4A in culture 1 is different than person 4A next Tuesday. So we have variability of behavior of any individual across time, and we have variability of habitual patterns of behavior throughout the population. So we have 2 distributions. And the distributions overlap. Not this, but this. If you look at actual behaviors, there's considerable overlap. So the Japanese, 22% of Japanese act more American than average Americans do on many dimensions. Most dimensions, nearly all. And 18% of Americans act more Japanese than the average Japanese does in nearly all dimensions of comparison. So these behavior dimensions overlap substantially. But we have something else. We have the unconscious image that we have of our own culture and of other cultures. Not observed behavior or observed actual differences. In most cases, we've never been there and we don't know. And we've certainly never sampled scientifically or even tried to observe objectively. So we're mostly operating on images from the media and that our mom told us and that we've read in TV programs and stuff like that. So we have unconscious images. And they overlap. But they have less overlap, substantially less overlap than the actual observed behaviors do. But not just that. We have a third dimension. We have a conscious theory of who we are, what we are like, and what we do, and who those other guys are like, and what they do. Everybody has a theory of their culture. And you often get criticized by other people for not being American, according to their theory of what an American is, even though according to behaviors you're quite American, or even more American than average Americans. But nobody looks at the behavior distribution. They look at they have an unconscious image, which is more extreme than the behaviors are in terms of exaggerating differences. Then they have a theory of themselves, which is even more extreme. So theories of ourselves tend to be not overlapping, or overlapping much less than images, unconscious images, and then actual observed behavior patterns are. Got that? This is true of every kind of culture in the world, because all cultures are just shared, heavily practiced routines. And therefore every culture is a high performance. And therefore every culture is a self. And therefore every self is a high performance. And therefore every self is a culture. And therefore every culture has a self and is a self. And cultures need to be apologized to and forgiven, treated like persons. The Americans try to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem. Well, it's not true that they're trying. They're not trying to solve, but their pretended ways of solving it is to bribe both parties. You know, you stop killing each other and agree to a 2-state solution, and we'll give you a highway and a shopping center. This is the American basic common sense that everything can be solved with shopping centers. You know, we know, people who know that the Palestinians and the Israelis are both selves. They want apology. And the Palestinians want to be apologized to. And they want the Israelis to sincerely apologize for stealing land from tens of thousands of their ancestors. And without an apology, they do not feel they can live with the Israelis as people, because they are inhuman for not apologizing for the harm they've done. In 1907, the New Yorker recently had a Zionist leader who wrote that we are in for big historic revenge and trouble because we are not taking into account that the land is already occupied by people who've been there as long or longer than we were there. That was written in 1907, so the Zionist movement knew very damn well that they were stealing land from people who had owned it for as long as they had owned it in 1907. But this is the American view, that you can treat cultures as if they're not persons. So the Americans, diplomatic corps and top leaders, have no understanding of what a culture is. And you would expect that. They're pretty dumb about culture in general, compared to Europeans who kill each other every 20 years, so they tend to learn a lot about culture because they use it to kill each other every 20 years, until the European Union came. So, what is the joke? The joke is the theory of culture guides a whole pile of extra behaviors about culture that are at odds with what we really are and do and believe. We don't know our own unconscious culture contents. All those routines put into us unconsciously as we grew up, we don't have no idea how many of them there were. All those explanations our mom gave us daily for 20 years about what's the right way to tie shoes, the right way to greet strangers, the things to worry about, the things to do well, the things to avoid. We don't know what all those things are. We have no inventory of that. We have no clue. We find those things out randomly as we go through adult life. Wow, I didn't know that that didn't work. I've always done that. Never thought about it before. Apparently it doesn't work. It offends some people. Eventually you realize, and if you go to college smartly, and most people don't go to college, but if you do go to college, you're supposed to, the college is supposed to be a library of the best routines in history and the best routines of contemporary world. And from that library, you're supposed to wake up and say, wow, I don't like most of what I am and what my mom and dad and my society made me, and I'm going to start at a journey toward becoming an adult. And if I work really hard for 30 years, I may become an adult someday at age 50 or so. By replacing unconsciously imbibed routines put into me involuntarily while I was a little weak kid with consciously chosen better routines that I get from the best people in history and in the contemporary. That's the purpose of college. Now, most people don't go to college. Most people just go to job preparation and use a college for job preparation. Most professors are evil and are perfectly willing to get their salary for job preparation. But there are some real professors in almost every department and in almost every college. And those lone voices sit there saying, you know, you're going to pay an enormous price for not being an adult. Your kids will pay an enormous price for being raised by a 12-year-old and a 50-year-old body. So the joke is, our theory of our culture is almost always wrong, much more extreme than our actual differences in behavior, and constantly screws up our ability to know how we're reacting, what we feel and think, because we have this theory of how we should be thinking and feeling. And you see people constantly misled by this. And so you find hundreds of thousands, millions of Japanese who believe they're conservative, and I am conservative because Japanese are conservative, because my government spent 20 years in the school system telling me I'm conservative, so I must be conservative, but I like funny-looking pink Iroquois hairdos that are a meter tall, and I like wearing rings in my ears and nose, and I like going out at Harajuku on Saturday afternoon, painting my face black, and but I'm a very conservative, typical Japanese. You know, you don't look like you're very conservative and typical. You don't look very group-oriented. You look rather individualistic, rather artsy, and rather weird. But they've got this theory of themselves. And so they can't see and handle their own experience accurately. It leads to great trouble and confusion. Because in every situation, I could respond as I do, as I see myself responding, but I have a theory that I shouldn't be that way. So I try to interpret this way I'm really responding as if it's this totally opposite thing which I was trained that I'm supposed to be. And very, very few people reach the point of adulthood where they can distinguish the observed behavior patterns, which are overlapping between different cultures and very much similar, from the unconscious images, which are more extreme and less overlap, but still some overlap. And then from the theory I have about who I am and who they are, which has very little overlap or none, and is the most extreme. And they get caught up in reacting and thinking and planning out of that theory of themselves, rather than of their observed behaviors or the unconscious images they have. And therefore, differences become arguments, fights, and wars, because we don't, our own brains, our theory of ourselves, gets in the way of us actually seeing ourselves and how we actually feel and operate. That's the joke.